Welcome to one of the most incredible rescue stories ever recorded. Before we begin, I invite you to leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and the exact time you heard this story. We're interested in knowing which places, and at what times of day or night, these documented accounts reach. What would you do if the person meant to save lives suddenly needed saving themselves? If the flames that they'd fought 1,000 times before turned against them, dragging them into darkness while everyone watched helplessly? This is the story of Sarah Mitchell, a firefighter from Cedar Falls, Iowa, who found herself trapped in an inferno with no way out. And the miracle that followed didn't come from her team, her training, or even her own strength. It came from a creature she'd never met before, a dog with eyes that seemed to see straight into her soul, who made a choice that defied every instinct of self-preservation. This is a story about the moment when heaven reached down through the most unlikely messenger, and one woman learned that even in our darkest hour, we are never truly alone. Sarah Mitchell had always believed she was born for this. From the time she was 7 years old, watching firefighters battle a blaze at her neighbor's house, she knew. While other children dreamed of becoming teachers or doctors or astronauts, Sarah's dreams were filled with sirens and smoke, with the sacred duty of running toward danger while everyone else ran away. Her father, a retired battalion chief, had tried to talk her out of it at first. He knew the weight that came with the job, the nights you couldn't sleep because you kept seeing the faces you couldn't save. But Sarah was stubborn, determined, fierce in a way that made him eventually smile and nod, recognizing his own younger self in her burning eyes. By 32, she'd earned her place at Station 19 in Cedar Falls, a small city where everyone knew everyone, where the firefighters weren't just emergency responders but neighbors, friends, the people you'd see at the grocery store or church on Sunday mornings. Sarah loved that about Cedar Falls. She loved knowing the family she protected. Loved that when she pulled someone from a burning building, she wasn't saving a stranger but somebody's mother, somebody's child, somebody who mattered to people she'd grown up with. It was a Wednesday in late October when everything changed. The leaves had turned brilliant shades of amber and crimson, and there was that particular crispness in the air that made you want to wrap your hands around a warm cup of coffee and breathe deep. Sarah had started her shift at 6 in the morning, the sky still dark, the station quiet except for the hum of the coffee maker and the low murmur of the morning news on the television in the common room. She'd been reviewing equipment checks with her captain, Marcus Reynolds, a 20-year veteran with salt and pepper hair and a calm demeanor that could steady anyone's nerves. They'd been laughing about something, some joke Marcus had made about the new rookie who kept forgetting where they stored the spare hoses, when the alarm shattered the morning peace. Structure fire. 847 Maple Street. Residents possibly trapped inside. Sarah's heart kicked into that familiar rhythm, part adrenaline, part focus, all purpose. She was suited up and on the truck in 90 seconds, her team moving with the synchronized precision of people who'd trained together until their movements became instinct. The address registered in her mind. Maple Street. That was the old Victorian neighborhood, houses built in the early 1900s, beautiful historic homes with lots of wood, lots of character, and lots of fuel for fire. The scene that greeted them was already chaos. Flames were pouring from the second-story windows of a 3-story Victorian painted blue with white trim, or at least it had been before the fire. Smoke billowed into the morning sky, thick and black, and Sarah could feel the heat from 30 feet away. A woman was screaming on the lawn, being held back by a neighbor. Her name was Jennifer Patterson, and Sarah recognized her from the community garden where they'd both volunteered last spring. "My daughter." Jennifer was screaming, her voice raw with terror. "Emma's still inside. She went back for the dog, she went back for..." Her words dissolved into sobs that made Sarah's chest constrict. Captain Reynolds was already barking orders, establishing water supply, coordinating with the second truck that had just arrived. Sarah caught his eye and he nodded. She and her partner, David Chin, would make entry, search the second floor where the mother said Emma's bedroom was located. Textbook rescue operation. They'd done this dozens of times. Except nothing about this fire was textbook. The moment Sarah crossed the threshold, she knew something was wrong. The heat was more intense than it should have been, the smoke thicker, darker, and there was a sound, a deep groaning that seemed to come from the bones of the house itself. David was right behind her, his breathing steady through his mask, and they moved through the first floor quickly, scanning for victims, finding none. The stairs to the second floor were still intact, though flames were licking at the walls around them, and Sarah could see that the ceiling was beginning to buckle. They climbed fast, staying low, calling out. "Fire department. Call out if you can hear us." Sarah's voice was muffled by her mask, but she shouted loud enough that anyone conscious should have heard. The second floor hallway was an inferno. The fire had originated somewhere up here, that much was clear, and it had spread with terrifying speed. Sarah moved toward what she thought was the bedroom, guided by the layout Jennifer had frantically described outside. The door was closed and she knew that was both good and bad. Closed doors could protect occupants from smoke and flames, but they could also trap them. She tested the door. Hot but not unbearable. She pushed it open and that's when she saw her. Emma Patterson, 16 years old with her mother's dark hair and terrified blue eyes, was huddled in the corner by the window, clutching a golden retriever mix who was trembling in her arms. The girl's face was streaked with soot and tears, and when she saw Sarah, something like hope flickered across her features. "I've got you," Sarah said, moving toward her quickly. "We're getting you out of here right now." But as she reached for Emma, as David moved to help guide them back toward the door, the world exploded into chaos. There was a crack like thunder, a sound that Sarah would hear in her nightmares for months to come, and suddenly the floor beneath her wasn't solid anymore. It was tilting, falling, and she was falling with it, Emma's scream mingling with her own as the compromised floor gave way and they plunged into the flames below. Sarah's training kicked in even as terror flooded her system. She twisted her body, trying to protect Emma, trying to absorb the impact, but the fall was disorienting, violent, and when they hit the first floor, Sarah's air was knocked from her lungs. Pain exploded through her left side and she tasted blood. Somewhere above, David was shouting her name, but his voice seemed far away, underwater. Fire surrounded them now, a cage of orange and red and unbearable heat, and Sarah realized with cold horror that they'd fallen into what must have been the kitchen, where the fire had already consumed everything, where there was no clear path to the exit. Emma was screaming, trapped partially beneath a beam that had fallen with them, and Sarah tried to move, tried to reach her, but her left leg wouldn't respond. Something was wrong with it, something was very wrong, and when she looked down she saw the unnatural angle of her ankle, saw the way her boot was pinned beneath fallen debris. Panic tried to claw its way up her throat, but she forced it down. She was a firefighter. She was trained for this. She would get this girl out. But even as she thought it, even as she tried to shift the debris, she knew the truth. She couldn't move. Emma couldn't move. And the flames were closing in, the heat so intense now that Sarah could feel her skin blistering even beneath her protective gear. This wasn't a situation she could fight her way out of. This was the moment every firefighter fears, the moment when you realize you're not going to make it home. And in that moment, something inside Sarah broke open. Not her courage, not her determination, but something deeper, something she'd kept carefully locked away since she was a little girl. Fear. Raw, primal, absolute fear. She was going to die here. This 16-year-old girl was going to die here. And there was nothing Sarah could do to stop it. "God," she whispered, and it wasn't a prayer so much as a desperate utterance, a word torn from the deepest part of her soul. "God, please." She didn't know what she was asking for. A miracle? Forgiveness? The strength to face what was coming? She'd grown up in church, had sat through countless sermons about faith and grace and the power of prayer, but she'd always been the kind of person who relied on herself, on her training, on the concrete things she could touch and control. Prayer had felt like something other people needed, people who weren't strong enough to handle their own problems. But strength meant nothing now. Training meant nothing. She was trapped, broken, and the flames were hungry. That's when she heard it. Through the roar of the fire, through Emma's whimpering, through the crackling destruction all around them, Sarah heard barking. Sharp, insistent, desperate barking. She'd forgotten about the dog, the golden retriever mix that Emma had been clutching when Sarah found her. The animal must have been thrown clear in the fall, must have landed somewhere safer, and now it should have been running, should have been escaping through whatever opening it could find, following every survival instinct that told it to flee danger. But it wasn't running. Through the smoke, Sarah saw it. The dog was at the edge of the collapsed floor, up where the kitchen met what was left of the dining room, and it was barking at them. No, not at them. At someone beyond. Sarah could hear voices now, her team trying to figure out how to reach them, trying to navigate through a structure that was failing by the second. The dog barked again, then did something that made Sarah's heart stop. It jumped. This animal, this creature who should have been terrified, who should have been thinking only of escape, launched itself into the flames. It hit the ground near Sarah and Emma, yelping as the heat seared its paws, but it didn't stop. It grabbed Emma's jacket in its teeth and pulled with a strength that seemed impossible for its size, and Emma, understanding somehow, began to move, began to drag herself forward even though Sarah could see the pain etched on her face. "Go," Sarah heard herself saying. "Emma, go." The girl was crying, shaking her head. "I can't leave you, I can't." "Go." Sarah's voice was stronger now, commanding, the voice of a firefighter who was used to being obeyed. "Follow the dog. My team will get you. Go now." Emma looked at her with anguished eyes, but the dog was pulling, and Sarah pushed at her with her good leg, and finally the girl began to crawl. Sarah watched through the smoke as the dog guided her, barking, pulling, leading her toward where David's voice was calling out, toward safety, toward life. And then Sarah was alone. The fire pressed in and she closed her eyes. She thought of her father, of the way he'd hugged her the day she graduated from the fire academy, pride and worry mingling in his embrace. She thought of her little apartment with its small garden, of the tomato plants she'd been nursing all summer. She thought of all the ordinary beautiful moments that make up a life, and she felt tears mixing with the soot on her face. "Please," she whispered again. "Please, I don't want to die here. I don't want to die." And then, through the smoke and flames and fear, she felt something wet and warm on her face. She opened her eyes and the dog was back. It had led Emma to safety, had done the impossible once, and now it had returned. For her. This animal was looking at her with dark, intelligent eyes, eyes that seemed to hold something beyond animal instinct, something that felt almost like recognition, like purpose. It grabbed her jacket just as it had grabbed Emma's, and it pulled. Sarah tried to tell it no, tried to explain that she was pinned, that there was no point, but the dog wouldn't stop. It pulled and tugged with frantic determination, and Sarah, not knowing why, not thinking anymore, just feeling, reached down and tried to free her leg. The debris was heavy, impossibly heavy, but she pushed and the dog pulled, and somewhere beyond the fire her team was calling her name, and suddenly, somehow, her leg came free. The pain was blinding. Sarah screamed, knowing her ankle was shattered, knowing every movement was damage she'd pay for if she survived, but the dog was pulling and she was crawling and the fire was all around them, but they were moving toward the sound of David's voice, toward the place where she could see flashlights cutting through the smoke. Hands grabbed her. Strong hands, familiar hands pulling her up and out and away. She heard Captain Reynolds shouting orders, felt herself being carried, and then there was air, blessed air, clean and cold against her face. Someone was removing her mask and she was coughing, gasping, and through the chaos she managed to croak out one word. "Dog." "We got him," David said, and his voice was shaking. "We got him, Sarah. He's okay. You're both okay." Sarah was on a stretcher, paramedics swarming around her, but she turned her head and saw the dog. Someone had wrapped it in a blanket, was checking it over, and the animal was sitting calmly watching her. Their eyes met across the distance, and Sarah felt something she couldn't name. Gratitude, yes, but more than that. Wonder. The sense that she'd witnessed something that defied explanation, something that spoke of a love greater than what she could comprehend. Emma was there too, being examined by other paramedics, her mother wrapped around her in an embrace that looked like it might never end. The girl was crying, but she was alive. They were all alive. And Sarah, even through the pain, even through the shock of what had just happened, felt something warm spreading through her chest. It wasn't just relief. It was something deeper, something that felt like coming home after a long journey. The weeks that followed were hard. Surgery to rebuild her ankle, then another surgery when the first didn't heal properly. Physical therapy that made her grit her teeth and bite back curses. Nights when she woke up gasping, the phantom smell of smoke in her nostrils, the memory of those flames reaching for her. But through it all she kept thinking about the dog. His name was Cooper, she'd learned. He'd been a rescue that the Patterson family had adopted just 6 months earlier. They'd found him at the local shelter, underweight and scared, and Emma had fallen in love with him immediately. Jennifer Patterson came to visit Sarah in the hospital, bringing Emma and Cooper with her. The dog's paws had been burned, but he was healing well, the vet had said. He was a fighter. When they walked into Sarah's room, Cooper went straight to her bedside and put his head on her good leg, looking up at her with those same knowing eyes. "I don't understand it," Jennifer said, tears streaming down her face. "The firefighter said he went back in. Twice. Once for Emma and once for you. Dogs don't do that. They don't run into fire." But Sarah thought she understood at least a little. She thought about those moments in the flames, when she'd been absolutely certain she was going to die, when she'd whispered that desperate prayer. She thought about how Cooper had appeared, not once but twice, defying every instinct, every law of nature that should have sent him running in the opposite direction. She thought about the impossibility of her leg coming free, of her finding the strength to crawl, of everything aligning just right to get them both out alive. Some people would call it coincidence. Others would say the dog was just protecting his owner. But Sarah, lying in that hospital bed with her ankle held together by pins and prayers, knew it was something more. She'd asked for help in the darkest moment of her life, had cried out to a god she'd kept at arm's length for years, and help had come. Not in the form she expected. Not as a sudden path opening through the flames or a miraculous intervention from her team, but as a dog. A rescue dog. A creature who had himself been saved and who had somehow understood that he was meant to save in return. It took Sarah 4 months to walk without crutches, 8 months before she could return to light duty at the station, a full year before she was cleared for active firefighting again. There were people who questioned whether she should go back at all, whether the trauma would be too much, whether her body could handle it after what she'd been through. But Sarah never doubted. She'd been given a second chance, a miracle in the form of a golden-haired dog with burned paws and infinite courage, and she wasn't going to waste it. The day she returned to Station 19, Captain Reynolds met her at the door with tears in his eyes and a bear hug that nearly cracked her ribs. The whole crew was there, and they'd hung a banner that read, "Welcome home, Mitchell." But the surprise that made Sarah's throat close with emotion was sitting calmly next to Marcus, wearing a custom-made vest with the St.